Here we are, yet another time in which we meet. Welcome, one and all, to another episode of Rejuvelation. Today is February 15th, 2018. Today I would want to talk about a book which I recently read, which I enjoyed very much, titled The Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield. Now, this book, for those of you who aren't aware of it, it will entail things such as energy and higher consciousness and things that most people don't believe in any way, shape, or form. And like so many other books like it, it's written off as fiction. But I'm asking that you suspend your disbelief for the time being and just try to look at it from a perspective that it's teaching you a lesson, perhaps an allegory, perhaps not. But what's important is what you get out of the points that it tries to bring across. Now, I'm not going to flush out all the ideas that are within it, because I think you would get more out of it reading it yourself. So I'm just going to give a quick overview and talk about certain points that I thought impacted me to a large degree. Now, the overall premise of the book is there's a man who is somewhat disenchanted by his work life, who just, it's the typical story. He, fresh out of college, he's in love with this girl, and, they plan this life together, but they part ways for their careers, and then they get so enveloped in their careers they totally forget that they had anything together in terms of a future or some kind of bond. How often does this happen to us that we get so swept up in making what we consider to be money, which, as I've explained, is the one eye, it's God itself. It's green language that the banks use that plays on the subconscious, which makes you believe that you are receiving God, the essence of God, the highest consciousness. And it plays on the mind. Every time you say money, 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 what you're really saying is God, God, God. And people worship money as God. It is the world's most believed in, most unchallenged belief system. It is the world's greatest religion, second only to authority. So these people, they loved each other, but they chose the careers which they felt would give them more of what they truly needed or wanted, or they just got so caught up. Either way, years later, I think it's something like 6 years later, once they part, she calls him out of the blue and says, "I want to meet you." And he was going to his cabin in the woods, and so he does, and tells her, "All right, I'll be there between this time and this time. Just stop on by." So she does, and they meet at a cafe, and she basically lays on him this story about how she had just recently been to Peru, a place which I myself have been to and can tell you it is as mystical and magical as ever. And every story that you hear about it being somewhere you want to go is true. I won't mislead you in saying it's the safest place in the world. There's plenty of dangers in every corner, but where can you say you're completely safe in this world in any case? No one is truly as safe as they ever imagined. And no risk, no reward. And the rewards are great for those who seek. In any case, she was in Peru, and she heard of this thing called the manuscript, which some priests had unearthed, and it basically held the promise of totally transforming all of society. All of society would be changed by the information alone, and in fact, the information said that it would change. And she only read one or two parts of the manuscript, of which there are 9. And she was compelled to tell him because when they had been in love before, he was interested in all these mystical, magical things, and she thought that he would really appreciate it. But she also said that, she went to go see a priest, and he told her about it, and then when she went to go meet up with him again, he had disappeared, and she didn't know what happened to him, so she returned to the States. And by the way, this book has also been made into a movie. If, in case you are not a reader, you can see it in video form. I have not seen the movie, but I can definitely highly recommend the book. Now she returns to the States, meets with him, tells him this, and then she says, well, I have to get back to whatever I was doing. I just wanted to let you know. And then he basically says, well, what do you expect me to do about it? And then she basically winks at him and says, I don't know, whatever you used to do with things like this. And apparently he was a real go-getter when it comes to looking into these things and thinking about it. There was also a man that had stolen her briefcase at the cafe that they were at. Apparently someone looking for the parts of the manuscript which she held. And so that's like the beginning of the tension in the book. So he goes back home, and he's like, well, he's really interested in it, but over the years he's kind of developed a really negative or skeptical outlook on the world, completely contrary to one that he held when they were together in the beginning. So he looks, just for fun, he calls up a travel agent and says, hey, how much is it to go to Peru? And, well, sir, it just so happens that I have a ticket here that was just canceled. It's non-refundable for the person anymore, and it's non-refundable for you. Super cheap, but it leaves in 3 hours. So he just gets the wild hair and decides to go. So he throws his stuff in a bag and goes on this plane. But before he does that, while they're still inside of the cafe, she gives him the first insight. So there's 9 insights. And the first one she says is, we are discovering again that we live in a deeply mysterious world, full of sudden coincidences and synchronistic encounters that seem destined. So my example of this is, I'm listening to things on the radio, and I had read them in books, and the Celestine Prophecy is actually one of these examples. I had received this book from one of my best friends, him and I are both on kind of parallel spiritual journeys, although I would say that he's more advanced in some ways, such as in health. I mean, he really works a lot harder for his health than I do, although I'm vegan and he's not. He juices all the time. He makes his own raw organic foods, like dishes and stuff, and he meditates, and he's just a lot more physically fit, So he's more dedicated to that at the moment, but I'm catching up. I'm coming for you, Blake. And it's always good to have a little bit of competition when it comes to health. If you have somebody that's with you, this is just an aside, doing it or parallel with you, you can feed off each other, help each other, and grow together towards your highest or higher good, higher selves, ultimate version, greatest version, any way you want to look at it, whatever helps, whatever you can repeat to yourself and infuse within yourself. So, and my example of this, he gave this book to me. All right, so that's a coincidence, or perhaps not. And then I was listening to, when he gave it to me, as I was reading it, it was interesting. And as I got more into it, I was really like, point by point, every insight that I got was really relating heavily to my life, as sometimes they do in books. Anybody who reads a lot of books or a few good books that really hit them strongly, you can tell by the way they talk about the books that it was something very powerful for them. So as I was reading the book and I was listening to Mark Passio on What on Earth is Happening, he was talking about solutions to the problems that we face in the world. And he was talking to someone else about healing, worldview healing, and getting a better, just your general attitude, fixing your attitude, fixing the way you see the world. Even though you see all the problems in the world, you see the negatives, you also don't let them shut you down to the point where you're I can't go this way. No, can't go that way. No, indecision is the greatest plague the world has ever known. It's humanity's greatest plague. It's the affliction that just ruins us. So like if you're just caught in fear and there's no right or wrong way, you can't do anything right. Everything is like wrong. I mean, so there is a wrong, but you're just caught in a rut. You're stuck in a rut. That is like, it's paralysis. And so that's the worldview healing and the thought healing that Mark and this guest were talking about. And then they talked about, as I was reading the Celestine Prophecy, they're like, yeah, that book, the Celestine Prophecy? And then they were talking, yeah, that's a great book. And then it's like, this is all what that it's about. And this is like, I kept asking myself, what are the solutions? Because Mark Passio did a year and a half of mind control or more. That's all he talked about mostly. I mean, there was a few episodes to give breaks, so it wasn't all terror. But in general, for a year and a half, all he delved into was the mind control that we're all under, all the different types of mind control, but the 12 major forms of mind control, or 12 or 14. And I highly suggest that you visit whatonearthishappening.com and look into Mark Passio's work, because it's amazing how deeply he goes into subjects. If you look at my work, it is a pittance next to his, how well he focuses, how well he breaks everything down, how much information that he conveys. He does it in a brilliant way, and that's why I've done what I've done, because I feel confident enough with what I've learned to share it, albeit not as eloquently or well fleshed out as him, which is something that I'm working on, and it's something that I'm going to improve more and more and more, because I don't want to remain in a state where I have information but I can't convey it well enough, because that's part of the task. It's part and parcel of knowing these things, is being able to convey it and getting better at it and better at it and better at it. That is your job. It's not enough to know it and just to throw it out there in a way that nobody can listen to. One of my problems is that when I convey information to people, I let all the chips on my shoulders be infused into the information that I'm portraying. Like I'll have an edge and I'll lean into people with the information. It's like, you're fucked, man. You need to do this. You have to do this. You're evil. I basically, it seems like for the longest time, the only way that I could convey information was by going for the nerve straight away. The exposed nerve. Whatever way, and this is also part of the book, because later on it talks about how we had all these dramas growing up between our parents and our siblings, They were power plays, and how we all fought for attention and love, and there were many ways to do that, and I'm going to get into that later. But basically, we had to get energy somehow, either through intimidation, either through intimidation and domination, or interrogation, or playing aloof. So then people have to, what's going on with you? You're sucking people into your world by being, like being a mystery, like, not wanting to, being enigma that you want people to dig into to try to figure out, and therefore you're harnessing that energy of people being interested. And then there's the oh poor me, well, my life's so terrible, and feel bad for me, give me your energy, there's that. So intimidation, interrogation, aloof, and oh poor me, and those are the four major drama plays that we enact in youth, and we develop those via our parents' trauma between each other. And as the Celestine Prophecy goes into, this happens because when most people get married, or when most people meet, they're incomplete people. And this goes for the vast majority of people. They are two C's, half circle people, and then once they joined together, they became a full person, energetically speaking, and also perhaps character and emotions-wise and all stuff like that. And because the sexual attraction and the emotions are so high and the vibrations are high in the beginning of that circle, at the beginning of that union, the underlying insecurities and faults within that relationship are not known, or at least don't become a problem until later, when that fades away, that passion fades away, that sexual attraction fades away, and then the true problems that the relationship had become manifest in cheating, or in anger, or in not caring, or whatever it is. And then the drama plays that they had from their use on, which they learned from their parents. Like, let's say I'll give my family as an example. My father was, first of all, he was a fisherman. He left home when he was 16. Him and his father did not get along. It was a very abusive relationship. And so he just left. And he was on his own for most of his life, and was always like an independent guy. But he was a terrible communicator. He was loving, but he was damaged as well, as are we all. But and so that was my father. My mom is from Germany. She's very logical, but also very free-spirited. And it's way too free-spirited for Germany. Like, she couldn't even hang there. Like, she's like, okay, guys, the Germans wanted to fold her and mold her into, this is the way it is, this is the way it's always been, and this is the way it'll always be. And my mom wanted to be free of that, and she was, more free-spirited. So she went to traveling to the United States, and she met my dad. And from that moment forward, she all the free-spiritedness within her really just was bubbled forth and was allowed to have free reign, because my dad was very much that way. And he, of course, loved my mom, and also she was very logical and structured, so she helped him that way. So they complemented each other well. But for us children, my sister totally latched on to my dad, in the sense that she was absolutely free-spirited, even more than my dad, because no matter, and then she really resisted and fought against my mom's structure, but she also incorporated into herself in many ways certain things that she really had. She had ideals about, like certain German customs and things like that, but she was still very much free-spirited. Now, when I came into the picture, I was more structured, a lot more structured than my sister. But I was also free-spirited as well, like my dad. But because my dad was insanely more rough on me because of his trauma with his dad, I gravitated towards my mom. And because my dad was a terrible communicator, but I spent most of my time with him, even though I gravitated more towards my mom's energy in her way, um, I spent most of my time with him. And since he was a terrible communicator, I became a master interrogator because I really was very interested in cosmic things, and I always wanted to know. I was very curious from birth on. And but to get anything valuable out of him, I had to interrogate him. Not because he wouldn't want to tell me. He always told me things straight up, you know. And I'd ask him about um, anything, and he would give me much more information that I could even understand at that level. But he would give it to me straight. But I still had to interrogate him just to figure out what he meant. And my mom too, like she wanted to tell me things as well, but she had the language barrier. She didn't understand English that well, so it was like it was a very profound mix of needing to interrogate, not because they didn't want to tell me, but just because they weren't able to communicate it correctly or enough for what I wanted. And so I incorporated two parts of this drama play, which is the reason I'm talking about this is because it's one of the insights in the Celestine Prophecy. And I became very aloof and enigmatic. Like the way I got energy from people was by interrogating them, or if I didn't know them, or if I wanted people to come to me, I'd play really aloof and stoic, and like just like staring out somewhere for hours. Or I played a lot of mind games in my youth. A lot. Too many. I did a lot of damage to myself and others with the mind games that I played in my aloofness, because that was the ultimate mind game. But once I got people in, then I became a huge interrogator, and I'd just be like waiting for them to be interested enough to come into my drama, and then I would turn around and instigate and interrogate them to figure out everything about them. And the way that interrogators get their power is like they interrogate people, and then they find out something that's a nerve in people, and then they attack that nerve, and what's going on with this? And then when people they expose their vulnerabilities and their energy is open, the interrogator gets that energy. And when an intimidator is doing his work to somebody, he makes them afraid in that way, just with their presence or with their physicality, and then he gets the energy that way. So once you start really understanding these four energy play dynamics, you see, or dramas, I should say, although they are dynamics, it's a drama because they're ways in which we gain energy incorrectly. Ways that we gain energy from others without their consent, in a way that harms them, which is, as we talk about a lot on this show, it's immoral. Anytime you harm anybody, anytime you steal anything from anybody, it's immoral. So yeah, that's how the energy dynamic between my family worked. And my sister's, she's kind of, I would say she's a kind of an oh poor me and aloof and an intimidator. She's not so much interested in what other people are doing in terms of like figuring it out and then attacking that thing. She's very open. She's a big open heart. But and I'm pretty oh poor me sometimes too. See, this is the thing. We have dominating aspects within the drama, but we can go in between all the dramas at any time. And the way to stop these dramas from happening, especially if you'd realize, okay, this guy's trying to intimidate me or this guy's trying to interrogate me, you just name the drama that they're playing. So one of the example that they gave in the Celestine Prophecy was, they were already in Peru and they were riding their Jeep around, and they had stopped for gas somewhere, and the guy came out of the gas station and said, "Who are you? What are you doing? What do you want?" You know, and basically the person who understood the drama play said, "Well, why do you have to be so hostile? Um, what are you trying to get at?" You know. Basically, they were, in one way or another, they were letting the other person know that they understand the energy drama that they're using. And then the guy said, "Well, we get a lot of crazy people around here. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. That's all, Because he was playing aloof. The main character was with another person, and they were driving, and he met the guy first in the gas station, and the gas station attendant was interrogating him, and he was playing aloof, like, "Well, we're just here. Don't bother me. There's nothing's going on." And the guy wouldn't let up. And then she came out, the other character, and basically said, she called him out, and then he said, "Well, it's don't worry, I'm not trying to be rude or anything. We're just have a lot of crazy people, or people that want to steal or whatever," because the person who was interrogating the aloof person, because this is between the two people. Usually interrogators become interrogators because one of their parents is aloof and doesn't want to talk and wants to be enigmatic or wants you to play into their world. So because, like, for instance, my mom was pretty aloof and my dad was pretty aloof as well. And so I had to interrogate them to get anything out of them. So I became very good at it because it's something I did from very young onwards. And then that's how I related to people for the rest of my life. So that's an example of that. Now, another big part of the Celestine Prophecy, which I thought was just amazing, was one of the insights talks about how humanity basically... Oh, okay, let me go back a little bit. He's on the plane, the main character, and the first insight, as I said, is that there's a bunch of coincidences and synchronicities, right? And that once we attune ourselves to them and become aware of them, they just increase in number all the time. Now, he's like, as he's on the plane, he's wondering, am I crazy? Like, I'm just going to Peru on a whim. I have no idea. I don't know anybody there. I don't know anything except for the name of the priest that my old girlfriend told me about. And what am I going to do? So he's sitting on the plane, and he goes to the bathroom. And as he's in the bathroom, he hears outside the door a guy talking to the stewardess on the plane. And he says to her, "Do you know anything about the Celestine Prophecy?" Or the manuscript, I should say. They don't say Celestine Prophecy, but he says, "Do you know anything about the manuscript?" And the stewardess was like, "I really don't know anything about that. I'm sorry." And so, but the guy's in the bathroom, and he's hearing them talk about it, and he's like, "Should I go out there and ask him? This is a big clue." So as he's leaving the bathroom, he sees where the guy sat down in a couple rows ahead of him. And he goes back to his seat, and he's mulling it over. And then he says, he bites the bullet, and he says, "Okay, I'm going to go talk to him." And so he sits behind him. And then he basically reaches, let's say that I'm the main character. And then the guy he overheard is in front of him. He says, "Excuse me. Yeah, I overheard you talking about the manuscript. I'm going to Peru for the same reason. Is there anything you can tell me about it?" So then, this is the first synchronicity that he really, has. And the guy goes on to explain what the second insight is. And basically, he's explaining to him how this all works. Why the prophecy and the insights in the manuscripts are coming out now, and how mankind's worldview has changed over the last 1,000 years. Because this book is already 24 years old, so it came out in the 90s, I believe, or in the 80s, 90s. And he basically says that in the Dark Ages, the church ruled everything with an iron fist, and everybody knew that there was a God, the Christian God, and that was the way it was, and the only way that people could relate to God or relate to their higher selves or spirituality was through the church. And because there was no printed Bibles there, because the Gutenberg press hadn't been made yet, there was a long time till that happened. The only way to reach God was through God's servants and the spokesperson for God, which was the Catholic Church. So, but people were disconnected from nature in the sense that, they were very much in nature. They were still way more in it than we are now. But they were disconnected from nature being something as evil or this, and that. There was a certain worldview because everything was explainable by God. Oh, your children's taken away in the night by wolves. It's God's will. Must have been evil. Or it was this time to go. Oh, the hurricane came and destroyed everything. Or there's a flood or the drought. God's will. We did something wrong. It always came back to it's God's will and we did something wrong. Or we did something right. Something good happened. And they would always be, if A, then C. It's like why not? They skip to saying that because this happened, and then immediately afterward that happened, A must have caused that. A must have caused C. Excluding what really created it. So the worldview was limited in that view. And then what happened was during the Enlightenment period, like the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, that's when man really started rejecting the church, rejecting their versions of everything. And they started saying, well, we want to know what's really going on. And science started to really get a foothold. And at one point, then they said, well, now we want to prove everything. We're not going to believe anything until it's provable. And up until that point, people had fended for themselves, and they didn't have the technology to get the security and happiness and free time that we enjoy now, perhaps to too far of an extent, let's say. Because we definitely have so much free time that we abuse it. And we are disconnected from nature to a huge degree. And in any case, when they broke from the church and people decided that we want to know for sure, we don't want to just believe blindly, for 400 years after that point, so from the 1600s on, what happened was that people started building technology, and they started all so that they could figure out what things were going on in the world. And they did this for a reason, because they still believed in God, but they wanted to know how God worked, or they wanted to know how the universe worked, so that they could be freed from the burdens of the world, having to be in survival mode all the time, so that they could worship God, or so that they could become one with God, so that they could spend more time doing what made them happy and what brought them closer together. Long story short, 400 years later, mankind has more than gained enough technology adequate to free us from the necessities of work and from this and that. But the structures that mankind has built around the technology, around, the science, has imprisoned him. He's more of a prison now than he was in the 16th century or in the 1600s, because we've developed all these institutions and all these laws that restrict us and that bind us to furthering the scientism and furthering the technologies, even though the technologies that we have are already more than enough to free the vast majority of humanity from the trials and tribulations and the injustices and all these things that the majority are subject to. So in the Celestine Prophecy, the manuscripts talk about how mankind will realize that he already has what he needs to survive, and that there will be a new turn of events in consciousness where people will awaken from the technological and scientific worldview. It's not to say that they'll abandon it, but they'll know that there's more important things to be recognized, more important things to be concentrating on, and the higher self-awareness will be blooming. Now, one of the other things that I want to talk about, because I'm not sure, there's 9, and I've gone through 1 and 5, I believe. 1 and 5. No, 1 and 4 I've gone through. So 1 was talking about the coincidences, and 4 was talking about the power struggle and the energy dramas. And 2, more or less, 2 is, the second insight is, as more of us awaken to this mystery, we will create a completely new worldview, redefining the universe as energetic and sacred. So science has already proven that energy is everything. All things are vibrant, energy vibrating at different frequencies. These are all things that they didn't know, or they couldn't prove all those years ago, when the church was still dominating. To them, God was everything, and we were basically in purgatory, and everything that you did here was deciding whether you went to heaven or hell. All right. So, another one that I really want to talk about here is the 8th principle, which says, when enough of us enter this evolutionary flow, always giving energy to the higher self of everyone we meet, we will build a new culture where our bodies evolve to ever higher levels of energy and perception. So, another one of the insights is that we can give people energy, and we can allow them to give energy to us. So when you're in a higher state of consciousness, a good example of this is you meet a monk, or you meet some, like the Dalai Lama or something. Countless people talk about the fact that when they meet the Dalai Lama, or when they meet these spiritual teachers, they feel infused with energy, like someone had just opened the canteen of their soul and poured in pure mana. Which, by the way, mana is spiritual or energetic energy, soul energy. And they were just infused and invigorated. They were rejuvenated, let's say. A little play on words there for my own show here, Rejuvelation. So these are masters of energy and consciousness, these gurus or these spiritual teachers. And just by giving you a look, they can change your consciousness. And the more people that become aware of this ability and can control the inflow and outflow, the more people that will create like groups of energetic grids that will release others and increase their energy and intake and outtake. The reason that this is so important is that since everything is energy, and we have the capability to give and receive energy, it explains that, you know, since all of creation is energy, and we ourselves are energy, and we can create, we are ultimately co-creators with the ultimate creation. So the ability to give energy and receive it, like by receiving it, what I mean is not just like accepting that if you feel great energy from somebody, you're just like, oh, all right, you'd become addicted to it and want it. That's what I would consider bad energy, a bad energy dynamic between people. So what it's really all about, and it says this in the sixth insight, is that in this awareness we can release our own pattern of controlling and discover a specific truth, a mission. We are here to share that which helps evolve humanity towards this new level of reality. So it's like any other instruction that you would give anybody. You would show them through your own experience and in logic how to work, and so that they can replicate it and do it better and better and better. So on the spiritual level, you share with people your own abilities. You show them that it's possible. You show them this transfer of energy. And if it's real, they'll feel it. There doesn't need to be any, false spirituality or mysticism of some sort that people don't believe in. What it will be, if it's real, is something that's felt in one way or another. And the better you are at conveying these feelings and these experiences, the more we can rise people's consciousness and evolve it. That's what the whole book is about. This whole book is about the elevation of human consciousness from one state to another. The manuscripts in the book predict that humankind will evolve in the early part of the 21st century through the awakening of individuals who truly know, who have truly experienced these energies and these rises in consciousness and their own consciousness, and they'll help others do the same. And that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to write about this or make a podcast about it, because in effect, that's what I'm doing here. That's what anybody worth their salt, as someone who's a commentator on where we are and where we should be going, and where we've been, we'll talk about these things. We'll talk about the rising of human consciousness, because that's what we're doing it for. If you meet people or if you listen to people who continuously seem to lower your consciousness or your awareness, you need to disconnect yourself from this stream, this putrid, vile stream of opinion, and because that's all it is. Anytime that your consciousness is being lowered, it's an opinion or it's a mind control operation that is preventing, it's limiting. And that's not to say that something that's true can't lower your consciousness, because that is true. So I'll take that back and say, anytime someone is lowering your consciousness, be aware of how that dynamic is working and if it is really serving you. Because you have to look at the dark. As I repeatedly say, you have to look at the things that are really wrong before you can say to yourself, well, things are wrong, let's do something to change it. And this is something that has to be continuously committed to. You have to renew this vow to yourself and to the world and to your higher self that you're going to keep going, that you're not going to stop. And this is how iron will is forged. People just won't stop doing something if they know it's the absolute right thing, and that ultimately you can't stop them. Because ultimately we are spirit. We are spirit living in a physical form in a much denser level. It's the ultimate playground. Here we learn and fail so much that the it seems like the failures greatly outweigh the successes, but in those failures, we learn things that could not be possible through success. And this is the whole polarity paradigm coming in yet again. All of the 7 hermetic principles, once you really incorporate them into your consciousness, you'll see them everywhere. Everything relates to it because it is everything. And the more you refine these thoughts, the more you refine your energy. Because energy, it's like, what can I put it as? It's honed in shapes. And you can actually change the shape of reality with your own energy. That's not to say that you can just do it with your mind and it'll happen. It's through your will, through your own energy manifested in your body and in your words and in the ideas that you relate to other people. And that's the most important thing, is to, even it doesn't matter if you're just a brain in a dish. If you can relay these informations, if that's all you can do, that's one of the most powerful things you can do. And that's something that you should be doing over and over again, is relaying, sharing what you know once you really know it. Don't take anything that I've said off the bat as true. Look into it. Research it. There's no such thing as any one person having all the links in the chain. You need to research it yourself. You need to figure it out for yourself and truly know it, feel it in your bones. And that's when things will change. Once people really know things and they've given up this whole solipsistic idea where nothing can be known, there's no such thing as truth. It's the greatest tool of your own imprisonment to believe there's nothing that can be true. And that energy isn't real, or that, if I can't see it, it's not happening. And this is when people have that mentality that they put themselves in a box and they never come out. And it's better to just look at what's going on and really incorporate it into yourself, and then choose a side. I was telling somebody the other day that I always remember in movies and in things like that, like in X-Men, when Wolverine is talking to Storm, and she says, or he's like, Magneto's right, there's a war coming. And you sure you're on the right side? And then Storm says, at least I've chosen a side. Because that's the thing about Logan, Wolverine, he's always running. He's got all this power, but in the end, he's always like trying to find an excuse to run, because he never wants to hold on to things to love them, because they always end up dying and leaving him. And I think a lot of people are in that same mentality, that same level of pain, where they don't want to hold on because they're afraid, and so they just want to think only of themselves and only worry about their own things, and then they leave everybody else in the dust. And people actually believe that this is going to somehow help them, things are all going to somehow work out by concentrating only on oneself. Well, let me tell you something. That's not going to happen. It's only going to perpetuate further wrongs. Because only caring for oneself and everyone else be damned, it doesn't share in any kind of energy which helps create. It only helps share energy that destroys. Because ultimately, when we only focus in on ourselves, we ignore things all around us. We ignore things that matter. We ignore things that we need to tend to. And then those things, when they recognize that you only care about yourself and you're only looking after yourself, they'll either leave you in one form or another, which will make you further turn inward again, only for yourself, not inward in the right way where you're empowering yourself and raising your consciousness and figuring out everything that's out there within here. It's only, oh, okay, you're just a hard shell. You're just a husk of a being that protects itself at all costs and doesn't, could care less about anything or anyone else. You know people like that? They're everywhere. And it's, as I've said before, and I'll say again, it's the Satanist ideology. The number one rule of Satanism is protect yourself at all costs. All costs. It means if you need to push an old lady down a flight of stairs and drown some kids in water and then burn her house down to get out alive, do it. Because the highest good in Satanism is that you only look after yourself. And there's people like this that literally would do those things just to save themselves. It's like in Seinfeld, that episode where George, he's at a birthday kid's party when he's talking about to the clown, and there's a fire in the house. And out of fear, he loses his mind and pushes all the kids and family aside, and he's like, fire, fire, and he's literally like harming other people, not even just saving himself. Forget the fact that he's not helping anyone else. He's actually detrimenting people who are trying to escape for his own good. And then when he gets to the, afterwards when he's sitting there on the ambulance, and the woman that he was there to see at the birthday party, she's like, how do you sleep at night? And he looks at her and he's like, it ain't easy. George is the okay. If you don't know, Seinfeld is an example of people who are spiritually and emotionally damaged. All four characters represent different parts of the human psyche and the huge failings within them. And it's a huge allegory. That's why it's so successful, because it really plays on people's minds and their subconscious and the true state of affairs in the world at large with people. So once you understand these things and you start looking at things again, things that you've looked at for your whole life, like I've loved Seinfeld, but it is only recently when I really figured out what each character represents and the level of lowered consciousness and awareness that they all do represent. That's when you start piecing things together and seeing it at a higher level. Because consciousness, what it really is it's showing you everything that's already there. It's been there the whole time. But you're piecing it together. You're having a holistic vision of what's actually being portrayed and has been portrayed to you your whole life. Another reason why this book is so important, because it helps bring you into higher awareness. Every page, every insight builds and builds and builds if you're open to it, which I highly suggest that you are. Now, we've run out of time for this episode of Rejuvelation. I will see you next week. And again, thank you for joining us. Peace be with you, and may the energy surround you. Flow in, flow out.
Just a minute, I know that it'll surface, so let me just hang out for the night. It serves a purpose, lets me take a break, and I might not think it's worthless. In the morning I can fight it, in the morning I'll rewrite it. Shh, I don't wanna talk right now, got enough to think about, hits in the clouds. I don't even wanna think right now, got enough to worry about, gotta keep it down. Got the same thing lingering around my mind. Alarms are gone off, so it's about time. My mind. Alarms are gone off, so it's about time. I got my reasons, but I just want some permission. You could just nod your head, or you could actually listen. Justification is the reason I'm efficient. I don't want any lies, a quiet mind is all I'm wishing. I've been alone, this is my disconnection. I just need a little warmth, some peace, and some direction.